2.5 weeks of campaigning for Venezuela's new Constituent Assembly begins on July 9. When President Maduro launched his call on May Day, he emphasized 3 aims. 1. To overcome the current conflict in Venezuela, including the deadlock between the presidency, the parliament, and the judiciary. 2. To restore peace on the streets. 3. To give working people the chance to decide Venezuela's future. Other suggested aims included giving constitutional status to Venezuela's social missions and community councils, as well as more rights for Afro-Venezuelans and greater environmental protection. Some 6,000 candidates will compete for 545 seats in the election on July 30th. These are divided into 3 categories. 1. Territorial, 364 seats. That means 1 representative elected for each municipality, with 2 extra reps for each of Venezuela's 23 state capitals and 7 for the capital city Caracas. 2. Indigenous, 8 seats. Unlike the other representatives, these will not be elected by secret ballot on July 30th, but according to the indigenous community's own traditions. 3. Sectoral, 173 seats. The idea here is to move beyond purely representative democracy and give different sectors of society a chance to choose candidates who will argue for their specific interests. The breakdown of sectors goes like this: campesinos and fishers, 8 representatives; business people, 5 representatives; the disabled, 5 representatives; students, 24 representatives; pensioners, 28 representatives; community councils, 24 representatives; workers, 79 representatives, divided among 9 different areas of employment. The opposition claimed this form of election is unconstitutional, but behind their objection lies both a fear that they have very little support among these popular sectors and a rejection of any sort of direct democracy.
For being here today. It's especially because of the rain outside. I know it's usually doesn't help, but it's great for you guys to be here with us. So I wanted to take this opportunity and talk to you a little bit about what's going on tomorrow. Where we're having our Constituent Assembly elections, which is a very important election in the history of Venezuela, being the second time we have popular-oriented constitutional process. The first one being in 1999 after President Chavez won. I wanted to show that video quickly so that you get a general idea of what it entails. But I'm sure that you may have other questions, and I hope I can also provide for you some of those answers. But I would start saying this, and often I've spoken to people here in the United States trying to explain the process. It's hard because in the U.S. you haven't had a constitutional assembly since 1789 or something, if I'm not mistaken. And then the idea was at that time. When you see the U.S. Constitution is my understanding is a very broad constitution that doesn't have so many specific items, and then a lot of the legislation or jurisdiction that changes jurisprudence changes during time with Supreme Court rulings or with local laws, and that's how it sort of evolves. What we set out to do in '99, and I think I could say that it's also the spirit in some of the constitutions in Bolivia, for example, or Ecuador, the new Latin American constitutions, more or less of the 21st century, is that the principle there is that the constitutions have to be something that are more flexible in the sense that they adapt to the people's demands, they adapt to the situations that the country faces at specific points in time. And for that, you need a mechanism that would allow you to, every so often check, update, renew consensus, because that's what it is all about. It's a unity consensus for the whole society. So you need that flexibility. So when we drafted the Constitution in 1999, which was the first time the Venezuelans actually voted for a Constituent Assembly to elect whoever was going to be the members, and then later voted on the Constitution itself, the legislators then decided that to include provisions in this Constitution, so that when that update needed to take place, it could be easily done. I mean, we would be in there. That's why under Articles 347, 348, it allows for the call for a Constitutional Assembly, and it allows, it tells you who can call for a Constitutional Assembly. So, for example, you have the President, together with his ministers, can make this call. You could have the 2/3 of the National Assembly could have done that, or 15% of the electorate, or about 75% of municipalities. So you have several instances that the Constitution allows for this call to be made. And the principle is, yes, part of it is revising a constitutional text, but part of it also, you have to understand that what was established in 1999 was a participatory democracy. And the reason that you convene the original constituent power, which is basically bringing it back to the masses, to the people, is because you have to deal with certain issues in the country that need a consensus to move forward. So you bring, in a participatory democracy, you don't bring it to the representatives to do that, you bring it down to the people so that the people could express their wills into these issues. For example, one of the main issues that is going to be discussed during this Constitutional Assembly welcome. One of the main issues that's going to be discussed during this Constitutional Assembly will be precisely economics. And as you know, I know a lot of you follow Venezuela, so I know that you followed that during the last 3 or 4 years we've had a very difficult economic situation. We could also go into more detail on that, but I would say that basically there's one of the main factors there is that Venezuela is dependent on oil production, highly dependent on oil production. It could account for about 70% of our 70 to 80% of our income, and obviously once general global market prices fell down, that deeply affected our economy. One of the discussions that should take place, and that has been proposed, and that is part of the platform that people are discussing during the campaign, is precisely how do we change the economic model so that we could lessen our dependence on oil, and we could find other ways to move forward. You could have it's the first time that we speak about a post-oil economy in Venezuela. Some efforts have been done during the Bolivarian Revolution. That's not to say that this wasn't an issue that was thought about before. But you have to understand that when President Chavez came to power in 1999, you had an oil barrel averaging $7, and by the time he or during many of the years that he was in office, it reached over 100. And during that time, what changed though was the policy, how Venezuela dealt with that income. We had massive exclusions in society. One massive exclusion of people left out, illiteracy, problems with healthcare, problems with education, and so forth. And what was done was that the revenues, this new revenue this increased revenue that was coming from oil, was actually dedicated for social programs, for sort of attacking that exclusion that had concentrated for so many years before. Doing that sometimes, took away from being able to build another system, like let's say a parallel or another alternative so that, you could lessen the dependence on oil. So, these things obviously take time. It's not changes that happen in 2 years, 5 years, or 10 years even. So now that we reach another moment in time, that we've been facing this hardship because of that situation, that we really have to focus and to how to change that economic model. And for that, you need to do it with a consensus that comes from the base, with a consensus that comes from the people, with a discussion that comes from the people, not only from above. We want to differentiate very clearly from what traditional politics used to be like in Venezuela, which used to be basically arrangements by elites. You had heads of different parties. They would, divide up the country, the government. I'll give you ministries, and we'll split this up. And these issues never went down to the base. That's why the Constituent Assembly is so important in that sense. And there are other issues that have to be addressed and have been proposed in the basis for the convening of the Assembly. For example, one most important element is a call for peace. As you know, we have been under a lot of violence in the last 4 months or so, due to some sectors of the opposition that really, have been part of this idea that regime change is necessary in Venezuela. They have never played by the rules. They have never played by the democratic rules. You see some of the leaders that head this sector are the same people that tried to overthrow President Chavez in 2002, are still there. Pardon after pardon, but they're still there, and they're still doing all these things. So part of this sector is promoting now this violence to try to force the president out and to try to create a climate of ingovernability for the president. So one of the things the assembly was also supposed to do is set out to allow spaces to talk, to dialogue. I mean, if the population wants it's unsatisfied with something, then what a democracy should do is sit down and let's talk about it, let's dialogue, let's work it out, let's vote, not let's burn the streets in front of us and let's burn people passing by just because we don't agree with what you think or you say. Other issues that are important that will be addressed in the assembly, as it has been proposed, are our multiculturalism. Venezuela is a multicultural country, and there's a lot of things that. For example, in the '99 Constitution, there was a lot of progress by recognizing indigenous populations. We recognized in that Constitution for the first time their original languages as official languages. So what used to happen before, for example, is that you would go, Spanish was the only official language. You would go down to some land, where the indigenous communities lived. You bring them a contract in Spanish, make them sign it, whatever it said. All of a sudden, that's official, not anything in their language, and you end up with their land being stolen and things like that. That stopped with the '99 Constitution by recognizing their language as official language, as official as the Spanish. And so whenever it has to deal with the indigenous communities, their language is respected as official. So we made a lot of progress with indigenous communities, but there were other communities that were left out, basically, or were not taken into the same consideration. One of the communities that has been very organized and is participating and has a very interesting proposal, for example, is the Afro-Venezuelan community that hasn't been officially recognized in the Constitution, and there's things that they also want to promote and defend and move forward on. We have youth have an important role to play. As a matter of fact, one of the specific sectors that's being convened for the assembly this time is students, in a way that you allow youth also to participate and shape legislation, thinking about first employment and all the other issues that are important for youth now. I would say that also on that, it's been a very tough campaign because again, the tensions that have been going on with the opposition. And a lot of these tensions are partly due because they feel that there's an international climate now that allows for them to have support from outside. And, much of that support is coming also, they feel that they get the support from the United States, from right-wing governments in Latin America, for example, Colombia, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But what's ironic is that for the last, year or so, the Venezuelan opposition has been calling for elections, has been calling for general elections, which are not contemplated in our constitution. But they want, they say that the government is not allowing elections to take place and so forth. When we actually have a calendar, when we actually have elections set, like tomorrow we're going to have elections, we're going to have elections at the end of the year, on December 10th for governors, we're going to have elections next year for president. But once these elections are called for, rather than participating, rather than setting out, if they have that huge majority of population support that they say, rather than using that to even reshape the country or with the constitution, they're not participating. They're calling actually for people to not only not participate but actually to block others' participation. There's a call out. I was just reading, reading my phone right now. There's a call out by one of the leaders from the opposition tomorrow to block roads, all the main roads possible within the country, so that people cannot get out to vote. There's pictures, and so many things I could send you guys to project, but there's pictures that we got. Where, for example, there's buildings, outside of buildings. They're putting, they're building walls. They're putting, they're throwing cement bags inside of residential buildings so that people are not able to come out and drive out. And usually these are, mostly middle class or even upper middle class areas. And then you would ask, well, how is that possible? Why, how could you let somebody, just block off your street? So then you have two issues. You have mayors or local authorities that are opposition elected, who are supporting these protests and basically just not doing anything to stop it. I mean, I don't think we can imagine that anybody here could just stop them in the middle of this road right here and just start building a wall with bricks. I mean, but that's going on in Venezuela. You have mayors that are not doing anything about that. Their police is not acting. And there's people that, obviously don't agree, but are afraid to go out and stop it because they're going to get hurt. There's been over 100 deaths now in the last 4 months, out of which at least 24 have been people that somehow were not protesting, were not in the middle of it. They just, bystanders, they just passed by, they just tried to move through the barricades, and somehow they got hurt by the people organizing the barricades. So that's sort of the level of violence that we're facing for tomorrow's election. So much that the National Electoral Council decided that you could vote at any voting center in your municipality. If you're being blocked, if you're being attacked at one point in time, or if your center is being attacked, you could go and vote somewhere else so that you could actually exercise your right, and that's not somehow interfered with. I want to maybe we could watch the other videos. What I wanted you to get a sense with those videos is more or less other items that are or how people are organizing. So you get a look how people are organizing and how they want to participate and take part of the Constituent Assembly and what issues could come up.
En la constituyente vamos a impulsar el reconocimiento de la identidad de género de las personas transexuales, transgénero y por supuesto la no discriminación por orientación sexual y también por color de piel. Al igual que para generar esa propuesta debemos también avanzar a una educación inclusiva que reconozca la diversidad de género, la diversidad, la pluroetnia.
De mujeres hemos exigido durante muchos años que se despenalice, se deje de criminalizar el aborto. De igual manera, todo lo que tiene que ver con matrimonio igualitario, tiene que ver con parar la violencia hacia las mujeres, transversalizar la política de género en los poderes públicos. No podemos seguir pensando que un ministerio, que una institución específica es la encargada de la temática de mujeres, cuando tribunales, fiscalía no actúan en concordancia a las leyes creadas por la revolución. El presidente Nicolás Maduro, en una salida democrática frente a un escenario donde no hay diálogo posible, llama a una constituyente. Entonces creemos que no solo es un tema de blindar la constitución que tenemos, que no es un tema de defender solo lo que hemos conquistado, sino también revolucionar.
Por un parto humanizado y una maternidad segura y feliz.
Por los derechos sexuales y reproductivos y acceso a los anticonceptivos.
Por el reconocimiento del trabajo del cuidado.
Fuerza de mujeres a la constituyente.
Fuerza de mujeres a la constituyente.
Por una constituyente comunera, feminista y popular. Fuerza de mujeres a la constituyente.
You know, if you go to the press or mainstream media, basically, you're getting the idea that the Constituent Assembly is, a group of 10 people that the president handpicked, and they're just going to give them, absolute rule and turn the country to a monarchy or something like that. It's absurd as that. But it's rather a very complex participation model. It's actually a very interesting. There's a lot of other sectors, a lot of other issues that are there that are playing out. And I think that's important. And again, the irony being that once the same groups that somehow want to or ask for elections are now trying to block these elections, and that's something very telling, about the real commitment to democracy or not. As a matter of fact, they were, prior, about a year and a half ago, a lot of the people that are now trying to block the Constituent Assembly were actually campaigning for one. When the National Assembly, the opposition won majority in the National Assembly, one of the issues that we're talking about is like, now we could draft a new Constitutional Assembly and we're going to move forward with that. But see, their point has always been to remove President Maduro from office, to remove Chavismo from political participation, basically. And that can't happen when you have real democracy, because as you could see, this is not an issue about a president or a party. This is an issue about people and organized people, and there's a lot of things that people want to get accomplished, and I'm looking forward to. So that's one side of what I wanted to share with you today, so that you get a sense of why these elections are so important for us tomorrow, and why we're looking so forward to them despite all the difficulties. However, the other issue that I do wanted to point out is to show you how these elections have been attacked, and have been attacked primarily from the United States. from the United States government. One of the, you have to remember, we are still under executive order from President Obama that declared Venezuela in 2015 an unusual and extraordinary threat to national security and foreign policy of the United States. That has not been, that's still in place. It's actually been renewed several times, and President Obama, right before he left, he made sure that was renewed for 1 more year, rather than having the opportunity of taking that executive order out. And even though he recognized publicly in the past that he did not feel that Venezuela was a threat to the United States, but even so, it remained so. And then now under President Trump, we've seen other actions that have obviously are attempting to again undermine President Maduro's government and undermine the will of the Venezuelans who voted for him. And I'll just tell you things that happened over the last week and a half or so that are very important. On July 17th, President Trump issued a statement himself saying that he believed that the Constitutional Assembly should not take place in Venezuela. And as a matter of fact, he said that if it did, if President Maduro went on with the Constitutional Assembly, as if it was just about President Maduro, then the United States government would take swift and strong actions, economic actions against Venezuela. Sorry, literally, strong and swift economic actions if the government of Venezuela proceeds with the National Constitutional Assembly. That's something very, that's a threat, very plainly spoken. That is a threat. And again, it shows you also the lack of consistency in discourse, because what they've been saying all along for the last few years is that they're concerned about Venezuela, they're concerned about President Maduro, because President Maduro is driving the country into economic disaster, because socialism is something that drives economies into disaster and so forth. And then if you're really worried about a country's economy, how are you going to threaten a country? How are you going to threaten a people that want to vote, that want to improve their lives? How are you going to threaten them with economic sanctions? Then you have other issues that are also even more concerned when you see that on the 20th of this month, there was an event called the Aspen Security Forum, and I believe it takes place annually, and you have different heads of, or people that deal with national security and so forth, go and share their thoughts, and it's like a seminar kind of thing. And their CIA director, Mike Pompeo, said that they want to, that they have been, he's looking forward to a transition in Venezuela, and that he has been, working closely with Mexico and Colombia on this. I'm gonna read this because I don't want people to think that I'm making this up, or this is paranoia and so forth. I'm gonna tell you exactly what he said. At a time you have a country as large and with the economic capacity of a country like Venezuela, America has a deep interest in making sure that it's as stable and as democratic as possible. And so we're working hard to do that. I'm always careful when I talk about South and Central America and the CIA. There's lots of stories, and then there's general laughter in the room. So I want to be careful what I say, but suffice to say, we are very hopeful that there can be a transition in Venezuela, and we, the CIA, is doing its best to understand the dynamic there so that we can communicate to our State Department and to others. The Colombians, I was just down in Mexico City and in Bogota a week before last talking about this very issue, trying to help them understand the things they might do so that they can get a better outcome for their part of the world and our part of the world. I mean, I don't know what you think about this, but this is definitely serious, and this is definitely, recognition that there's activity on behalf, or by the Trump administration against the democratic, legitimate, constitutional government of Venezuela. Regardless of politics, regardless of what issues you may agree or not agree with the Venezuelan government, regardless of where you would stand in Venezuela's internal politics, it's unacceptable that these actions are taking place because Venezuela is a sovereign country, because we have a right to our own self-determination, because we have a right to decide whatever we want to do with our political system, and that cannot be interfered with from outside. And it's a call for even for the opposition, because I know some people from the opposition that are not in agreement with having external forces participate. But key figures in the opposition right now are not saying anything about this. They hear the head of the CIA say something in this. They hear President Trump threaten us with economic sanctions, and they just look the other way because their interest is getting the Chavista revolutionary government out. So that's something very serious and very worrisome. I think that part of the problem is that it seems that the policies towards Venezuela have been somehow taken over by the group of anti-Cuban legislators that you have in Congress. Particularly, you have people such as Senator Marco Rubio, who have made this their personal campaign, which I understand given the fact that most of these legislators have made their political careers based on an anti-Cuba platform, and that's pretty much all they have. So if Cuba, if the relations with Cuba improve, as they did, to reestablish diplomatic relations, even some of the measures that President Trump announced, didn't do away with some of the other things that President Obama moved forward on. They really are losing that political, platform that they had. So they need to pick another enemy, and they need to find somebody where they can sort of live out the fantasies of overthrowing the Cuban Revolution, and then that's what they do with Venezuela, and that's what Senator Rubio is doing, and Ross Lang and Diaz-Balart and Curvelo and all these others, who, when you see, the common thread is always that, is always the issue against the Cuban Revolution. That's not going to change our policies towards Cuba. It never has. We are in complete solidarity with the Cuban Revolution. We've always been, and they have been with us. Again, it's an issue of every country determining for themselves what their future is, and it's not for anybody from outside to say. Senator Rubio, for example, says that he's concerned, in order that he does this because there's a base of Venezuelan Americans or Venezuelan community living in Florida, and that he's responding to his base. And then I asked the question, why, wouldn't it be more important for his base in Florida that rather than he promote a bill in Congress that is aiming to allocate about $20 million to intervene in Venezuelan affairs through democracy promotion or helping organizations and so forth, why doesn't that money go to Floridians and to their healthcare system and to all the other issues that I'm sure should be much more their concern than intervening into Venezuelan politics? There's a lot of other things I could tell you. Even Secretary of State Rex Tillerson saying at one point when he was discussing the budget how the 2018 budget, how they needed to help the Venezuelan opposition because the Venezuelan opposition needed help and to have a united force, a united voice because they didn't have that. So again, this is not something not acceptable as interference. And just a couple of evenings ago, the embassy in Venezuela, the U.S. Embassy in Venezuela, issued a travel alert saying that they were removing, or they were actually, some of their members were leaving. Some of the spouses of diplomats, family members of diplomats, were leaving we're getting them out of the country. Prior to that, a couple days before, when the opposition called for a general strike, there wasn't really such, but when they called for a strike, they also issued an alert saying, well, you know, make sure that you have, for the next 72 hours, you have enough food and water in your homes because we never know what's going to happen. So this type of terror, you know, coming out from official statements are not really just aimed at protecting U.S. citizens, but obviously, you know, this is a public statement that goes out to Venezuelan citizens as well, and, you know, adds to the climate of tensions. Look, at the end of the day, Venezuelans, I think, I am very sure I could say that the majority of Venezuelans wants to solve their differences through voting, want to solve their differences through, you know, democracy, not fighting, not intervention. You know, there's even polls that come from opposition, or people, you know, they don't identify with the government, so they identify more politically with the opposition, would tell you that about, you know, 53% of the population rejects sanctions to Venezuela. 63 oppose that the opposition leaders are actually following through with that, or, you know, somehow not denouncing them. So there's obviously you know, an important part of the population that just wants to live in peace and move forward. On the plebiscite, I'll make just a brief mention because I think it is important, and then I'll go to that last video so you, and then we can open the discussion. The opposition, in light of the fact that we're going to carry out this Constituent Assembly tomorrow, that is going to show a massive turnout of support for, you know, for the Venezuelan or the Bolivarian Revolution and the Constitution and peace and dialogue. In light of that, what the opposition did was call for a plebiscite, which is not, it doesn't have, it's not a, it doesn't, there's, that figure doesn't appear in our Constitution, so it's not a binding, it couldn't be a binding plebiscite. And basically the idea was there that, you know, once you did that, you could sell to the international community and to the world that, you know, oh, we got all these votes, so now this is what the real Venezuelan people want, and so forth. The way they carried out these this plebiscite was they didn't use the National Electoral Council, which is the institution that carries out elections in Venezuela. It's a nationwide institution that has, you know, a logistical setup that, you know, you make sure there's machines that would make sure that you can only vote once, because they, you know, once before you vote, you have to put your fingerprint on the machine, and the machine unlocks so that you can actually execute your vote. If you do that twice, it's never going to unlock. So those type of you know, protections that we've had for, you know, the last 18 years or so, there was none of that. We saw videos of people. There was a person that actually voted 17 times and was able to go to different places and vote, and we actually got there's footage of that. Not only that, but, you know, right after, then they burned the, you know, the material. So I mean, it was a manual vote, so they, you know, they burned the material. So there was never anybody to count to double check what the numbers were. All this, so like I said, next day we have all these people supporting us, and, you know, the international community should support, you know, or should stand against the Constituent Assembly. And you know, and you see when the State Department also called, you know, meetings of other diplomats here, not us because we weren't invited. They called other diplomats here to say, you know, you should also stand against the Venezuelan Constitutional Assembly. You should actually do statements and you know, encourage other countries to do so. Other countries follow through, not surprisingly. You have, you know, statements from Colombia and Panama, Brazil. Well, Brazil. I'm not going to get into that story, but Brazil's underwent a coup, and, you know, we can't take seriously a country that doesn't have a democratic president in office. Can't really take that seriously. But other countries did come out with these type of statements. They're trying to make the European Union come out with these statements as well, and so it's part of this campaign. So that would basically, the questions they have also, which is something very interesting, the questions they were asking in the plebiscite was, are you against the Constituent Assembly? Are you in favor of the armed forces supporting the National Assembly over the government? And then the last question was, are you in agreement that the National Assembly should form a parallel government that should take over the state? Again, the issues of legality and what things that can be done, I'm pretty sure you can't, no country is going to allow you to carry out, a vote saying, can the army overthrow the government? Are you okay with that? Even if you got 2 million votes or whatever million votes saying that, that your agreement, that cannot be legal, because there's a constitution, there's some, there's a framework that, that can be violated. In any case, what they're trying to do is to have people from the armed forces turn against the government and promote, a coup. This is something we've seen before in Latin America. If we go back to the history books, and if we know now that the CIA is working hard for a transition to happen in Venezuela, we could definitely see Chile 73 or many others. Brazil 64, Guatemala 54. Anyway. But and that's the idea. And then the National Assembly started, forming this parallel government. And as of last week, they actually named a parallel Supreme Court. And obviously, those people have some of those people that were named Supreme Court justices have been placed under arrest because they're taking over functions that are not, they're not legal. In any case, I'll show you that one last video, just so you see it. I'm not making this up. I'll let you see it for yourselves. The opposition spokespersons. This gentleman who this video is about is actually a member of the National Assembly of Venezuela for the Primero Justicia Party, which is the party of Capriles. You remember that name? Who ran against President Chavez, against President Maduro, and they now head the National Assembly. He'll tell you better than I could tell you what their plan is, and you'll see for yourselves.
Ahora, si el gobierno lo que quiere es guerra, vamos a dársela y vamos a paralizar Venezuela. Lanzarle un cuetón a un policía que va en una moto, seguro no es legal, pero esas motos han asesinado a nuestros compañeros. Pero tres preguntas que van dirigidas básicamente hacia, de acuerdo o no con que la dictadura se mantenga en el poder, de acuerdo o no con la convocatoria de una constituyente, y si estamos de acuerdo o no en que la Fuerza Armada Nacional ejerce el 350 y el 333 en desconocimiento del gobierno. Necesitamos estar preparados para lo que puede ser un escenario en el que el gobierno tumbe las comunicaciones. Todo eso puede pasar el día que nosotros decretemos la hora cero. Necesitamos estar preparados para que nuestra gente tenga cómo replegarse y cómo volver a salir. Sepan que esas paros que nosotros convocamos de 2, de 4, de 6 horas son simplemente pruebas de ensayo para lo que se viene en Venezuela. Y Y entonces yo me preguntaba, Juan, ¿y si ustedes paralizan Venezuela y el gobierno igual hace la constituyente? Si eso pasa en este país, hay una soberana guerra, señor. Y él decía, bueno, pues tienen que tener un plan B. Pero bueno, pero ¿cuál es el plan B? ¿Cuál cree usted que es el plan B? Y él me decía, bueno, que nos invadan. Eso es atrevido. Pero para llegar a una intervención extranjera tenemos que pasar esta etapa, ¿o no?
So thank you. I look forward to questions or continuing the discussion. I don't know how to do a history in like a short amount of time, but I'll say this. Venezuela, like many other Latin American countries, was suffered the neoliberal policies. That basically tried to diminish the role of the state, tried to privatize many many of our resources and our national companies. And basically always left out the majority of the population from access to healthcare, education, and housing and other issues of the such. Venezuela was despite being an oil-rich country and despite being having that resource. I mean, we have the largest oil reserves in the world. We didn't escape that neoliberal trend in the 1980s and 90s. As a matter of fact, speaking on the reserves, when they discovered there was a type of oil reserves that they discovered in Venezuela that were that it was actually oil, but they started saying it was something else. They didn't describe it as a different type of they call it bitumen, which I'm not sure how to say that in English, but but anyway, what I mean by that is that it was actually heavy. It was very heavy crude, but they described it as something else, so that it could actually be sold and privatized rather than exploited according to Venezuelan laws at the time. So that was a way to actually just keep taking the money and resources outside of Venezuela. That collapsed in 1989 when an event that we called the Caracazo, which is February 27th of 1989, which is a massive popular revolt against neoliberal policies, specifically against the increase in the price of gas and in the price of public transportation. People just went to the streets. There was no organization to this. I mean, there was no leadership. There was nothing planned. It was just a spontaneous move of people to go out on the streets and rebel. And we had a government in place who decided to repress the population, and which is you'll find it ironic when you hear about now how they talk about repression, but back in 1989. In a week's time, there was an official count of 298 people dead. This was a result of their confrontation with police and military forces trying to restrain the uprising. We found mass graves that showed there was at least 3,000 people dead. So that's repression, that's human rights violation, and that was the government previous to President Chavez. After that, we're talking 1989, after that there was a movement inside the armed forces who rejected having been placed into the position of having had to do this, and knew that the country was going through a very wrong place. I mean, then the country needed to take another turn to something different. We were basically a two-party system at the time. Both parties were deemed, corrupt, and really nobody really seriously thought about their ideals and everything like that. It was more of, their business dealings and so forth. And in 1992, there's a military rebellion trying to overthrow the government and trying to impose, to open the way for a popular government to come out. That was unsuccessful, but the person that led that rebellion was Hugo Chavez, who at the time then became a figure that people really identified with. I mean, one of the very striking elements of the uprising was that all of a sudden you realize that people, rather than come out and say, "Oh, we want to defend our democratic system," a lot of people were coming out on the streets and saying, "We think that guy's right. He has a point. This place is corrupt. This place is responsible for all those deaths in 1989. This government has to somehow go in a different way because we can't live like this anymore." So people supported President Chavez, or at the time, just Lieutenant Commander Hugo Chavez, who went to jail for a couple of years, and then after he was released from prison, he started campaigning and saying, "Okay, now let's try to do this, through the democratic system, through elections, and win elections." He campaigned. He went throughout all the country and visited every single municipality, met with grassroots movements, met with people, got in touch with, every single sector of Venezuelan society you could think possible. And in 1998, against every prediction, he won by a landslide in the landslide election, with his main issue being we need to rewrite the Constitution and to make these laws, fit our current situation and our people's demands. So that's how we got to rewrite a constitution in 1999. And from then on, has been a popular government, left-leaning, with a lot of problems, because obviously there was a lot of resistance from the elite in Venezuela that controlled, the oil sector, that controlled, all the country's wealth, and that pretty much live in a fairy tale world, while the majority of the population lived, in a lot of hardship. President Chavez did tremendous work for regional unity, for democratization of media, of communications, for creating the concept of popular power, this grassroots organizations actually exercising power, and talking a little bit about your question. Part of the things that President Chavez created was his communal councils. Was the idea that our communities had to organize, discuss their budgets, discuss their plans, and sort of govern themselves. And there are laws that have been created in the last 15, 18 years on these issues. What we're trying to do with this Constituent Assembly is to institute that in the Constitution, sort of maintain that within a constitutional framework, so that it strengthens the role of these organizations. Basically that was what President Chavez's government was about. Again, I'm running through this. Obviously, that was not going to be liked by some people in Venezuela. It was also not going to be liked by the U.S. government, because Venezuela promoted a very independent policy away from the usual U.S. Just following what the U.S. determined for Latin America. So in fact, Venezuela opened up relations with other parts of the world, not only within the region, but also China, Russia, Middle East. The very first thing that I think I would safely say bothered the U.S. administration was that trying to recuperate the oil prices, like I mentioned, it was $7 a barrel, trying to build that back up. President Chavez went and visited every single member country of OPEC to talk and say, hey, let's do this again. How do we organize? How do we make this price go up. And at the time you had presidents such as Saddam Hussein, Muammar Gaddafi, who were ruling their countries and they were member countries of OPEC. Those visits, especially the Hussein one, I know were something that ticked off the United States. There was actually a phone call saying, no, don't do it. And the response was, we're an independent country, we do whatever we want. And thank you. Thank you for your concern. And we did. And that's what this has been all about for the last 18 years. President Chavez unfortunately died 2013 of cancer. And ever since, I think we've been undergoing a situation where, combined with outside forces such as the fall oil prices, but also with internal surge of the opposition saying, it's now or never. Chavez is out. Nobody's going to have his popularity. He's dead. The revolution is over. Now we could go and take over. And the great surprise, I think, for the right wing has been to recognize, to actually have to see that the revolution in Venezuela is not something that depended on one person, but it's actually something that the people. President Chavez was an expression of the people. He wasn't just a leader and that was it. I mean, he represented the people, and we're still here. We're still here. We're still struggling, and I think the viciousness against President Maduro has partly been precisely because the one president to succeed President Chavez after he passed and then was elected was actually a worker. He was a labor union leader, and the worst thing that in a way the Venezuelan elite sort of had to accept at one point that they had to be governed by President Chavez, and they did that reluctantly. But once they realized that they had to be governed by a labor union leader, that was completely unacceptable. And come on, this is a bus driver. How can the country be in the hands of a bus driver? And this resentment is real. This resentment is real, and that's why the attacks have been much more vicious in the last 3-4 years than have that ever were before. So I think I got that sort of covered. Look, involvement in CIA, the United States, again, involvement and interference is so wide. I mean, you could, anything from a statement to actual, plotting is interference. None of it is acceptable. We've had, if you go to the WikiLeaks, you could have a fun afternoon just, looking at all the cables on Venezuela and on the, on how, there were items, there was actually a plan of how to, subvert Chavismo, take some people and then bring them over to your side, and, how we could try to convince other countries not to support Venezuela. I mean, there's a whole list of things they thought about doing and they've been working on for a long time. And, we've had, in the cases where we've seen people from the embassy actually taking part in these things, gathering, protesters, or somehow actually participating in things, we have actually taken actions and we actually have expelled them. Again, there's also at the same time there's a big effort because we understand that this is a very complex country as well, and that there are many actors and many forces playing, and we don't want to sacrifice our relationship with the people of the United States because of these things. So we do a hard effort to maintain lines of communication open, to try to dialogue, to try to from the first day, what we said is we want a friendly relationship with the United States where it's based on mutual respect, and not on threats or trying to undermine the government. So it's a difficult task, but we're here. I'm here. I'm here for a reason. We're trying to keep those channels open, and every time we see this interference, we denounce it. That's what we need to do. But it's definitely we see the recent in recent months, it has increased, again, I think because of the proximity of the people that somehow were or influenced the Bush-era policies towards Venezuela. Remember that in 2002 there was a coup attempt against President Chavez, and that had support from the State Department and the administration of President Bush at the time, and also because of so some of those people are back or around, and also the ones that are describing how Venezuela, how the Latin American policy should be. And also because, again, like how I mentioned before, there's a group of people, leaders in the United States, for whom Venezuela is actually internal policy, not foreign policy. I mean, they have benefits to gain from Venezuelan American votes. There was an article in Huffington Post a few months ago, which was very interesting because it was written by a Venezuelan, who's a Venezuelan American, who was actually a minister during the coup against President Chavez. It was a coup that lasted 47 hours, but they were able to come in, throw away the Constitution and say, they name a new cabinet and everything. So this guy was actually finance minister of that brief government, and now he comes here. Now he presents himself as, I'm an advocate for Latinos, and he actually had a good role in Hillary Clinton's campaign under the Latino Victory Project. And this guy, Leopoldo Martinez, he says, so he wrote this article in Huffington Post, which is interesting because he talks about the new Venezuelan American population. He says we're now up to 100,000 people, Venezuelan Americans, who are of the brightest Latinos that have great education. You wonder why? Great education, and are very hard workers, and I'm sure they're going to have a very good and important roles in politics, in U.S. politics in the next few years. You realize then that if you're talking about a number of 100,000 votes from the Venezuelan American community, if you think that the election for governor in Florida was decided by 62,000 votes, and that Florida went to President Bush by 112,000 votes, that 100,000 votes is important, and it plays into internal politics here. And that, to me, explains a lot of what's going on. Beyond all that rhetoric and all that, you see there's actual interest from those groups that, to get those votes. That's why all these resolutions, laws, all these things that are being moved in Congress are bipartisan, because both parties want to get a piece of that. They need those votes equally. Multinational corporations, sure. Exxon. Well, don't forget who the last CEO of Exxon Corporation was, and what he's doing now. I think Exxon. The issue with Exxon was that President Chavez. One of the things that he did was renationalize the oil sector, and sort of redefine the amounts that companies were able to have, or for example, in a concession, making sure that Venezuela always had the majority of the concession as opposed to the minimum, and then there was a fair amount of income that would come from those concessions back home. That's normal. That's something that everybody who wishes to defend their country and their sovereignty would do. Obviously, Exxon and some of the companies didn't want to accept that. I'm not sure. I've heard that Exxon in particular didn't want to, because had they accepted those conditions in Venezuela, they would have to accept those conditions other places as well, like Nigeria and other places as well. I'm sure there's something to that. So they didn't accept. They sued Venezuela. So we've had a very tense relationship for many years. And there's a border dispute that comes from over 100 years with Guyana, which is our neighbor, which is not really a border dispute with Guyana, but it was a border dispute with the British Empire, who ruled Guyana for many years. And then what Exxon is doing is sort of, it's something that we've dealt with, through mediation at the UN and, trying to take care of it diplomatically for many years. What Exxon has been doing is sort of getting back in there and provoking the new Guyanese government to try to, make that, another issue with Venezuela and say that now Venezuela is imperialist. And trying to take over Guyana's right to live off their oil, but we're talking about oil that's in the land that's actually disputed, or in the waters that are actually disputed. Anyway, you see that Exxon is playing a role in this, and obviously what they want to do is add another problem to the Venezuelan government, so that once the Venezuelan government is out, they can come back and do whatever they want in our oil concessions. Social missions, there have been many. Throughout this time, there were literacy programs, there were housing programs, there were, with the Cubans, what we did is, one of the things we did was redefine how we thought about trade. So that rather than have Cuba find dollars in the market selling some, whatever goods they needed, so they could pay for our oil, we decided, well, why don't we actually exchange oil for what you have? And Cuba has, great medicine, for example, one of the things we did was exchange oil for doctors. And these doctors actually went to communities in Venezuela that nobody ever dared to go into, inner city communities or rural communities that Venezuelan doctors would not go because, the pay is too low, or, it's dangerous, we don't want to go there, everybody wants to become a rich doctor and not, tend to these things. And so we did that, and that was a great way to actually, get people for the first time in their lives to have access to healthcare, for the first time in their life to read. I mean, there's people. I remember an event. We overcame literacy, and that's recognized by UNESCO. Illiteracy, sorry, and we eradicated that in 2006, if I'm not mistaken, or 2005. And one of the most moving things that I've seen was, a lady who was over 80 years old and she learned to read. And a lot of people would say, well, what for? She's 80, she's not going to go to college now, she's not going to do this. No, because it's people's dignity. It's dignity, of course. And it was beautiful. It was beautiful to see her happy and say how she was going to help, her grandchildren read, and that was what it's all about. That was giving people back their dignity. So the idea is that many of these instances of social missions somehow are also protected under the new constitution. So that they, so there's an obligation for them to keep on going in time. We have to do that because it's a mandate that we have from the people. If you look at some of the things that have happened in Latin America in the last few years, it's precisely that right-wing governments have come in and have destroyed things that were built. And I'm thinking particularly in two cases, Argentina and Brazil, where there was a whole, there was such a setback in labor provisions and pensions and even organizing, so many things that were lost because somehow these programs weren't entrenched in the country. What we're doing is trying to strengthen those. We have a housing project, which is, if I'm not mistaken, a couple of days ago it's reached 1,700,000 homes. When the project started in 2012, we were at a deficit of 3 million homes. So that means that we're already over half of the deficit that we needed to cover. These homes were designed for low-income families, for families that didn't have a home. A lot of them were actually victims of landslides, floods that took place in 2012. And that kind of created the urgency to come up with these housing projects. And the idea there was to make sure that that these families don't lose their homes. So one of the provisions, for example, would be that the title is a collective title. It's a collective title for the family. It's not, you don't get a deed to the home as an individual, but the family gets it. And then eventually, after several years, you could sell the property, but you can only sell it at cost value. So you can. So the idea is that you don't make any profit of it. I mean, you give it to another family that needs it the same way that yours needed at the beginning. So when the National Assembly was taken over by the opposition, or when they won the elections in 2015, one of the first things they wanted to do? Oh, they wanted to revise the housing projects. What was their idea? No, we have to give people the right to their deeds to their apartments. Why? Because then you could mortgage your apartments, and then you can, and basically you're proposing to put 1,700,000 homes into the real estate market, and then have the banks make a lot of money of that. But nobody's thinking about what's going to happen with those families. So that kind of thing doesn't happen. We have to work on the assembly so to make sure that these programs stay the way they are. So these programs are institutionalized in a way that they're not that our most vulnerable citizens are not going to suffer from the wings of a right-wing assembly or anything that wants to take over and do that. CLAPS were a community effort where the government has imported some of the food that was missing. Again, part of the economic problems that we've been facing were shortages of food. I'll give you a short explanation, but it's a lot more complex than this. One of the things we did was subsidize food, as well as other things. Subsidize medicine, subsidize food, so that people would have more access. We also placed some price controls. The problem was that some people found a way to make money off of that. How? You could buy cheap food, and then you could go next door to Colombia or Brazil, and, for example, sell it there for more money, and you make profit. At the same time, that starts taking some of these foodstuffs from the market. So then all of a sudden you realize it's hard to find, I don't know, rice, sugar, these things that are coming like everyday things from the basic foods. It was more complex than that. I mean, there's problems with distribution as well. The distribution of food is mostly in private hands. It's only about 3% of the distribution in the country that's actually state-run. So you can see that when you want to, and if we think back about Chile, when you want to create some sort of chaos, you very easily can by selectively, holding back a certain product, or sending it to the border where you can resell it, or these things. The CLAP was a way to try to fight that.